And welcome back. Sorry. We're moving into our final conversation for today, and we're going to be talking about coastal erosion and mangrove reforestation. And joining us, we have Dr. Minerva Pinelo, who's the program director for the Pan American Development Fund. We also have visiting students from George Washington University. We have Nora Hassan and Nick Moy. Good morning and welcome to the show.
Good morning, and thank you for having us again.
Now, Minerva, let's talk a little bit about this project and make the connect with how the link was established with George Washington University.
So in the beginning, when we first introduced the Community Preparedness and Resilience Project, we talked about 3 areas of focus. So we were looking at capacity building, we were looking at contingency planning and early warning systems, and we also looked at the climate resilient infrastructure. And so under that 3rd area, we started looking at the research that would be needed to look at the specific implementation strategies. If you remember, we're a mechanism that comes in to implement. So, you know, while we look for other partners who are at maybe a quasi-government level, policy or advocacy, our role is really to pilot strategies. And in order to look at the climate change adaptation, that is one of the areas that we're promoting in the South, we looked at a potential partnership with George Washington University. And the talk really started way back with Ambassador Nestor Mendes, who has now ascended to Assistant Secretary General. He's always kept an eye out in DC for the partnerships that can bring fruitful projects to Belize. And I'm not talking about, you know, budgets to make it happen, but implementation that keeps everything realistic, feasible, and that makes it replicable beyond the life of our projects. So it got us talking to George Washington University and grad students then who were looking at internship experiences in the field signed up. And that's how we came across, you know, the Elliott School students, and they brought to us a proposal of offering pro bono consultancy in order to work towards their graduation requirements. So here we are today. And the areas of focus they've been looking at are 2 specific interventions. We're trying to address coastal erosion, which is, again, you know, on media, both at a local, national, global stage, and we're looking at mangrove reforestation. And so their task was really to look at the studies, both studies that have done outside of Belize, in Belize, success rate, and they've been tasked now with this field experience to help us to put together cost-benefit analyses for both interventions. So that's what we're here to discuss. And you know, we work together with the environmental NGOs, but we're also very much a community-based group. So our approach is to get Dangriga and Hopkins as involved in these interventions because they're the stewards of those projects going forward. So that's the story we have to tell today. Yes.
And it's a perfect segue to Nora and Nick and talking about your interest in working in this particular area.
Sure. So like Minerva mentioned, we're actually a team of 4 doing a 6-month pro bono consultancy with the Pan American Development Foundation. While a majority of our work is done from Washington, D.C., we've been working on this project since November, doing research and liaising with Minerva and her staff here on the ground, as well as PADF in the head office. Our purpose right now is to come to Belize for about 2.5 weeks. We've been here doing some field work, some data collection. So we've been assessing quite a few different sites for potential mangrove reforestation, both low energy and high energy. We're looking at mangrove reforestation pilot projects, but also ones that would involve gabion baskets and geosynthetics, which are more hard engineering. So we're doing the data collection right now and assessing costs and benefits of the 3 different proposals, and then we'll take that back with us in Washington, D.C., where we'll finalize a cost-benefit analysis and then do a midline evaluation of the program so far.
And to elaborate on that, as Minerva mentioned, a large part of what PADF is doing and the goal of this project in particular is to involve the community. And that's why we're here. We're looking to speak with the community, engage with them, as Minerva and her team have been doing for the last 7 months that they've been in Dangriga, and really get their gauge their level of interest, gauge their experience and knowledge on these techniques, because these projects, particularly mangrove reforestation, doesn't have to come at a high cost. The initial investment involves a lot of education and training on the methods, but after that, once the community is involved and interested and they have the knowledge, then some of these methods, the low energy methods, just replanting methods, can be actually quite cost effective.
In terms of your assessments that are taking place, what areas are you looking at?
We've looked particularly in Dangriga and Hopkins. So we've selected public waterfronts. We're also looking at private waterfronts where extreme coastal erosion has been experienced. So it's twofold. You know, we're looking at the infrastructure through whether mangroves or through geostructures, which are the baskets that mimic seawalls, or geotubes that look like tamales with sand wrapped inside. So we're looking at all the measures that can allow Dangriga and Hopkins to show what would cause, you know, some sort of beach reclamation eventually. At this point, it is more to look at how to safeguard properties. So Christ the King is one of the schools in Dangriga. If you're familiar with the area, a little beach area that's, you know, very frequented by the locals, the school's property has come very close, or it's threatened quite often by the cyclical pattern of the beach. And then there is an area called Williams Beach. It's a bit north of Dangriga, and they have had extreme cases of erosion as well. So mangrove reforestation is one strategy, and that's called soft engineering. And then there's hard engineering, where we're bringing actual geostructures that they're also looking. And one example is the gabion baskets, or gabion baskets. And they're really like a mesh box filled with boulders, and these mimic seawalls.
Now, I want to just in terms of following up with the assessments, and I did pay attention to the fact that you're looking at private properties as well. Given the context as to what Hopkins and City River is now becoming, it's one of the emerging tourist destinations in Belize. And, you know, you guys have been here at one of the best times of the year, and, you know, people come for beaches.
We planned it.
Which means mangroves don't necessarily fit in that environment. So how much do you take that into account when doing your assessments? How do you factor it in?
Of course, it's very important, and one of the things that we're looking at, as Minerva mentioned, working with the private sector as well. So there are some instances where some resorts in that area have kept their mangroves and kept their vegetation and natural cover, and still maintain nice beaches for, obviously, the tourists who come, because that's the big draw. So there are ways to maintain, to have both, to actually have your cake and eat it too, right? You can have a nice beach and still have the mangroves functioning as a system to build the strength of the soil and prevent some of the erosion from happening. And in addition to just the soil erosion, they add a protective layer against sort of storm surges and high winds. So it's not just the retention of soil that mangroves function as a protective mechanism
What
for.
has been the general response from members of the community? It's easy when you're under the threat already of erosion to try and mitigate it in whatever way possible. But in terms of, as Marlene alluded to, the whole movement towards development, and for a lot of people that generally means the removal of mangroves. So what has been the engagement with the wider community?
We looked at addressing it at a local level, both individually and as a community. So we do outreach to schools, we speak to the local authorities, the town council, the village councils. We are also, though, engaging private sector, primarily the hoteliers, you know, because it's important for them to, when they sign up to sustainable development, for example, or look at eco certification, that they understand the balance and the importance. Many people will ask us why mangroves, you know, they're going to be cleared eventually. But for us, the focus is let us sensitize, you know, Belizeans to the importance, and then let us look at striking the balance. So that while, and in next story, you know, there are areas that will be developed for tourism.
Yes.
We also can ensure that there is protection because of climate change, and you have to adapt to these new realities. So the adaptation strategies are going to be key, even for the private sector. And again, PADF, you know, prides itself in looking for public-private partnerships. So we already have one private sector member ready to support one of the pilot in Hopkins for a public waterfront. And this becomes their new way of doing corporate social responsibility as well. So while we're not at the level where we can incentivize through policies, we hope that our work will inform the decision makers to move towards that kind of incentivizing.
Well, this is, I mean, less than an hour ago we were saying this exact same thing
Exactly.
in terms of the reef audit. So in terms, but what you can give us in terms of perspective is the dialogue with the private sector and why sustainability hasn't been a priority for them. Is it simply a cost issue?
Well, I think it was more a perception issue, both from local and even international. You know, you want to sell the white beach. Belizeans think mangroves will bring mosquitoes, and I have to clear them if I want more land, and I need more land use for it. But if you understand the importance or even the economic impact, we're looking at estimates of over $175 million of benefits to tourism, fisheries, and avoided damages if we keep mangroves. And while pre-1980 you may have seen, you know, less mangrove clearing, over the past 2 decades, you've seen it fall to maybe 96.7% of the initial inventory of mangroves. And the data will vary. So the clearing may continue, but it's important for us now, and that's why it's an intervention, to think about how to address development and look at the ecosystems we must protect. So when you're clearing, you're also you should think about tourism, fisheries, avoided damage through climate change and the patterns that we're experiencing now.
I'd imagine in Hopkins their interest was peaked because they had that massive erosion problem last year.
Last April, less than a year ago.
And there were many issues that they said were possibly the cause, the growing and dredging taking place in other parts nearby. So has that been a realistic example for residents there as to how serious and how quickly the problem can manifest?
Yes, I think from our experience and from, you know, the consultations and the interviews we've had, the reality has hit so close to home. The hoteliers know that loss to their property, cancellations, even when the Sargasso invasion came, and you know, we're also looking forward to know what's the next pattern for this year. It does impact the tourism industry. Right now, you know, it's peak time still, and it's important for them, for the private sector, to really come on board as one of the main actors in promoting. And I'll tell you, the community, for example, the school children, they're sold on this. We go to schools to make presentations and we ask, so who's going to come out and volunteer for transplanting? Everyone wants to come. So there is motivation on the ground. I think the increased awareness, and that's where the cost benefit needs to come into play now, to bring that argument forward at all levels, you know, and that's the importance of the project and our consultancy with GW.
Now, how do you strike a balance? Are there best practices that you can employ to strike a balance between having a beach and maintaining mangroves as well?
Sure. So a big portion of keeping that balance, like Minerva mentioned and Nick, are both engaging the public and private sector, but also looking at the importance of using mixed method approaches. So in areas where mangroves might not be the most suitable option, we can look at utilizing some more hard engineering mechanisms like geosynthetics or gabion baskets. One of the mechanisms, like geosynthetics, can be actually buried under the sand, so individuals can still use the beach as a natural beach or coastline. It's not ruining the recreational value of the coastline. So while this is just a pilot project to test out a few of the different mechanisms and see in which areas which mechanisms will work best, long term it will require this mixed method approach, but also having public support and working with private sector, primarily the tourism sector, will enable Belize nationally to be able to implement projects like this.
In the consultations that you've been doing so far, what's been some of the surprising information that you've received? You speak private sector, community members, I'm imagining, yeah.
So I think for us the biggest surprise, based on our findings and research and then carried out here through our fieldwork, is we found that community involvement is oftentimes the most integral part of implementing programs like this. And from day one when we arrived in Belize, we've really seen community engagement and community support. We've had a chance to meet with local stakeholders, but as well fishing communities. We've been able to conduct some focus groups and chat with members of the communities that are already being affected by mangrove reforestation through their livelihoods. And just understanding how important mangroves are to their livelihoods and to understand the whole ecosystem approach. I think that was surprising for us that people are already on board. They understand that climate change is happening, that it's not going to stop, and that it is affecting their livelihoods from today. And there's just such a great willingness to partner with PADF and with organizations that will not only provide sustainable development, but also give back to economic livelihoods as well.
I think for us, again, like to echo my colleague, it was really refreshing and reaffirming to hear from the community members the sorts of things that we are back in Washington, D.C., far removed, researching about what mangroves can do for the community and what deforestation has done and what climate change has done. All of the things that we're sort of reading about in dry papers, we're hearing from the mouths of people who are actually experiencing it on a daily basis. So, of course, in our research, it's really important to triangulate our data. So we have our research that we're doing back in DC, but coming here was a very important key step in our capstone project that allows us to understand what is actually happening to people here on the ground.
So how do you reconcile the science and the anecdotal evidence that you have?
Of course, it all goes into one report, of course, and we try to gauge based on our experiences with numbers of people who are telling us these sort of stories and the interactions that we have with them. And it's not really, this is sort of where the art of development comes in. I would say it has to be.
The art of development?
Yes.
Art of science.
You have to mix the science with the sort of the quantitative data with the qualitative data. And different researchers are going to have different methods, and we collaborate as a team of 4, so that helps us sort of make sure that we have a lot of conversations about the data that we're receiving and weighing it and making sure that we're all getting the same information out of it before it goes into the report. So that's one of the ways that we are trying to reconcile, like you said, that qualitative and quantitative data.
One other question I have, because obviously, with fishermen, you may have the big one that got away. In terms of looking at the communities pre the erosion challenges that they have, how do you establish baselines, for example, to say this is how significant the erosion has been, and also perhaps cast models to how significant in terms of the going forward for the future it can continue to impact the communities?
And if you remember, in October 2015, we had worked closely with the University of Belize. So we've always brought students on board, but it allowed us to do GPS tracking for the coastline to document the present state of the beach, whether through erosion or accretion. And we looked at some of the data, you know, the trend, to look at what has transpired over the years, and also perhaps we can ascribe economic loss to that data as well. So we're looking at a multidimensional approach. We're looking at it from an economic perspective, looking at it from a geotechnical, you know, view, and looking at it from a social component. So the data we have, and sometimes it's very difficult to come across data for specific areas of Belize. So the data we've collected, we've shared with our project partners in Belize, and we've also been working on, you know, adding now through focus groups. And the fishermen will tell you, you know, 10 years ago I could go out to sea from that point. Or the school principal will say, well, when I was a young principal here, my playground was X feet away from my last building. And so that's the kind of data. Even when we bring in engineers who are also part of our team, you know, they have to liaise with the community. They get very involved in consulting with the community to understand the changes that only the people of the communities we serve can really help you to consolidate. And then it ties in with all the research, the observations, all the information coming from the government line ministries, and that's how we hope to make the most and the most strategic investment in building resilience.
And the changes, are they inevitable?
The changes to the coast will continue, because for Dangriga, what we've learned is that a lot is cyclical, but because climate change does change patterns, again, we need a lot more hydrological data. So for example, if we want to install geostructures, we need to understand the angle at which the waves hit. And we've talked to Mr. Gonges, for example, and he says, well, I can give you data for the airstrip. That's still a little too far removed from our site. So we have to keep combing for that kind of data. So yes, the changes are inevitable, but our focus is climate change adaptation. What can we do on the ground to build the resilience of the communities that we're working with?
Well, we have the real life example in terms of economic indicators. There's just a $500,000 investment in Kikaker for beach reclamation.
Right.
Will we be able to make those types of investments if we don't stop erosion in areas like Hopkins?
You know, and this is not, it's difficult to say that Belize can replicate that kind of investment. So what can the community do? And that's where our pilot phases and our implementation activities will best inform the community. The Dangriga Town Council, for example, is cognizant that post-intervention, they also have to look at maintenance budgets. How are we going to ensure that, you know, that continues to be the best method for the community? Because every, you know, so many changes happen yearly now with climate, the patterns of climate and so forth.
So what happens after you receive the cost-benefit analysis?
So it's kind of simultaneous. So while they're giving us the numbers, which everybody wants to look at, right? Private sector, government, community.
That's what makes the decision.
We have already done a cohort of training of fisher folks who volunteered to learn the transplanting techniques for mangrove reforestation. But then we intensify the recruitment of volunteers for both Dangriga and Hopkins. And once we offered the training, it's time to do the actual low energy method, which is the transplanting. And then onwards, you need to now establish your monitoring program. It's not, and that's what we tell the kids, for example, it's 3 to 5 years of work of monitoring to be able to really gauge the impact. And so we need custodians. We need co-managers of these public spaces. We need the community to make that paradigmatic shift. You know, it's not about clearing, it's about trying to protect. And for the school primarily, we've been very open in dialoguing with the principal and the administration. They also see it as a way to create a fence for the school and offer more, you know, school property and protection to the kids. So it doubles. And the kids have had a successful project of reforesting with coconuts. It's taken 2 years to grow, so they're already open to this kind of initiative, and that I think would yield, you know, more success as well.
You have different types of mangroves. So is there a particular type that grows well down south?
So when we want to look at a specific site, we have to look at what's native.
Yeah.
And in particular, we've seen red and black being more native. So the closer to the coast, you know, the more specific the type of mangroves. So red, black, then white, and then buttonwood, which is more of what you see inland. So for Dangriga, it would primarily be red or black. And then we're looking at the nurseries that are very close to the site so that we are not changing so many variables. So that's another task, you know, the volunteers going into the nurseries, but ensuring that the nurseries themselves don't get disrupted and jeopardized. So it's a balance. And we have, you know, the trainers and the experts to guide us with that so that we're on par with our goal of protecting the environment while looking at development work to build resilience. So it's like a formula. Yeah.
What is it, the art?
It is the art. And I think when you bring in development work from an international perspective and then you meet the team locally on the ground collecting the data, it just really adds to the strength, you know, of the team altogether. So.
And just a frivolous kind of question before we end. Obviously, this is your first time in Belize?
Yes, it is.
What has the cuisine been like for you?
I told them you'd ask them something.
Yeah, thankfully we've had a wonderful team here with PADF Belize showing us not only a great cuisine, but also we've had quite a good amount of time in our off time to do some exploring of the country already. So hopefully this is our first of many visits to Belize.
And yeah, we've had a great opportunity to try some of the local cuisine. There's still some that we haven't quite gotten to, but you know, that's okay.
We have to work and balance.
but we do like some of the snacks, I think, here, the salbutes and panades and some of those.
And I think he's heading for fried jacks after this.
Oh yes, breakfast
sold
and
on
fried jacks. Heard good things.
Well, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, as always, for welcoming to share updates and to really get, I think, the word at the national level for our little spot, Dangriga and Hopkins. So thank you.
All right. Well, of course, that's our show for today. Remember, if you want to contact us, you can contact us at oye@channel5belize.com, Marlene_oye@channel5belize.com,
and William_oye@channel5belize.com. Have a great day, everybody, and be sure to join us tomorrow morning at 6:30
when you open your eyes
to start your morning right. Until then, keep your eyes open
and your heart open. See you soon.